Hi, welcome to Up Your Nerd Cred. Did you used to know everything that was happening in the Marvel and DC universes? Did finding out that some superheroes are from Marvel and some are from DC blow your mind? Has keeping track of everything happening there and then realizing we're talking about the comics universes, not the cinematic ones, and the different universes with their own multiversal crises have all gotten a little bit out of hand? Well, don't worry. Up Your Nerd Cred is here to talk about the gods cosplaying as men, the men cosplaying as gods, and how much the cinematic universes are really leaving out. At the end of each episode, you'll hopefully know a little bit more than you did and get up your nerd cred. I'm your casual nerd. I'm sad that I'm skipping New York City Con because my kid is still too young to be able to have a good enough time, and I'm not sure that the cosplayers wouldn't freak him out. So hopefully next year we'll be able to hit up the Sunday show. Especially since my much cooler brother actually works for the kind of company that sends him there each year. No, I am not going to tell all his business and say where it is that he works. Just know that he is cooler than me and has been forever, so I'm not going to sit there and miss the opportunity to go and see him be very cool and popular in public.
And meanwhile, I'm AM Diaz, your quote-unquote expert nerd host, who's currently having his utter exhaustion and hyperfixation fighting for dominance. We have entered the gay high holy days of Halloween, where costumes are being built, and so much money is being spent on parties and events, and I do not have the money or the time or energy for everything.
Damn, we are going to have to make a Patreon soon, huh? So, as a reminder, gang, we currently have shared custody of our expert nerd, and so, we've decided that we're going to have a few casual and expert level episodes. So this is aiming to be an expert level episode. The casual nerd will have probably seen the show Moonlight, but the story that we're going to be going into is a bit wilder than even Oscar Isaac's beautiful portrayal was. And so we got to get the expert to weigh in on things.
We're going to have to put expert with a grain of salt in this one, because while I am casually familiar with Moon Knight, and I did enjoy the TV show, he unfortunately was not a major part of my comic book education compared to, say, members of the Avengers, X-Men, Batman family, Titans, Justice League. I'm going to have my blind spots, and unfortunately, Moon Knight will kind of fall into that in this round.
I mean, it's not like Moon Knight has a substantial similarity to a special interest of mine, which might have tipped me into more of the expert category than you. That's not important, okay? Because we are clarifying...
Oscar Isaac is very cute. We get it.
We are clarifying the format, but that doesn't mean that we're skipping out on the format altogether. So, yes, I know. So, even though we're clarifying the format, it doesn't mean we're skipping out on the format altogether. So, podcast listeners, what are we nerding out about this week? And as always, we're nerding out about all kinds of things, okay? It does not just have to be about heroes and villains, okay? Beehive has been bumping Renaissance and Cowboy Carter all week. The first they came from poem isn't an instruction manual. And if you haven't bought your opening night Wicked 2 tickets, you're gonna have a really bad seat if you're able to get one. So, what are we nerding out about? I'm gonna tell you that I have been having a great time with the whole Sherlock comments thing that's happening over on Threads. Okay, so the story is basically that OP, Am I Sherlocked? Their sister-in-law wanted to have a birthday party for her kid, but they couldn't do it at their own house because of a kitchen renovation, blah. So rather than actually ask OP and get her buy-in on this party, sister-in-law waited until she was out of the room, got a real reverse psychology situation happening to get OP to offer to let them use their place for the party. And since OP was never actually asked to anything, and since people mostly just assumed that she would do everything because she's a known people pleaser, she chose not to stress herself out about a party that folks are making plans for without her. Also, the party was on Tuesday at 6 p.m. So party was ultimately kind of a dud because OP held fast to the conceit of clearly being a guest at the party that no one had asked her to host. Grandma and Auntie had to help sister-in-law throw the party, and both of them tried to sort of guilt OP into helping unsuccessfully. And so now people up and down the timeline are telling about the time that they chose not to let people walk all over them. And it's great, and I love it. And speaking of walking all over the place, I actually want to hear, didn't you say that you had like LA Comic-Con the last time that you were here? How'd that go?
Went great. Had a great time at the event. Shout out to my friend Chris Riley for getting me in for free. I appreciate that pass. And I spent most of Friday helping out the X-Men 97 actors at their booth doing signings and photos. So I was handling the money, getting the photos for them, and stuff like that. So had a great time there. It was awesome seeing, voices of Rogue, Jubilee, Sunspot, Rogue, Nightcrawler, and Morph. So we got...
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so shout out to Lenore, Holly, Guy, JP, and Adrian, the spectacular Nightcrawler, who we don't get to see nearly as enough in the States because he lives up in Canada and whatnot. But it was great having him down. And then Saturday and Sunday, I got to enjoy cosplay. Saturday, this was a group that I've been dying to get together ever since I started doing Nightcrawler cosplay.
Mm-hmm.
And we got the 1980s Excalibur group together.
Wait, was this mullet Kurt?
No, Kurt didn't really have a mullet. Yeah.
I thought there was a mullet Kurt at some point.
He had a shaved head at one point, and some artists drew everybody with mullets, but it was not like a consistent look with him.
Okay.
No, he was still in his standard X-Men costume and all that stuff, and this was the 1980s team, so it was myself as Nightcrawler, of course.
Of course.
My friend London, she played Megan, who is a lesser-known mutant/fae hybrid character.
Mm-hmm.
Our friend Vero was Captain Britain.
Oh.
Then we had Amy, who was dressed up as Kitty Pryde, and she created her own Lockheed Stuffy.
Oh, Lockheed! Kitty Pryde's one true love.
Well, she never stood Lockheed up at the altar.
We don't talk about Ink.
Oh, we do. We will talk about that. And also, finally, to round things out, Sierra was our Rachel Summers, a.k.a. Phoenix. And we have to give major props to Sierra because of the fact that she absolutely hated this costume so much. And she dressed up just for us. So, Sierra, if you're listening to this episode, thank you so much. We love you. And at some point, maybe we can get you on the pod.
Heart react. Yes. Oh, yes. No, you are. We would love to have you on the pod so that we can, apologize for having you in the costume or maybe compliment you for being in the costume or both, whatever works.
And then Sunday was DC Day. I was supposed to be part of a Titans group of guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that really just kind of fell to the wayside so hard. We won't go into too much details about why, but let's just say alcohol was involved the night before, and a lot of people were not able to rally as much. So
everybody can't like pop up the next day.
Yeah. I, however, arrived as Robin the Boy Wonder, and I fell into a few photo shoots with some people, and ended up rallying a lot of people during after the DC big shoot to do like smaller group photos. So I assembled the Titans.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of what Robin does, though? That's like kind of... All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back to up your nerd cred. Welcome back. So, the question burning me up this week is, who is Mark and Steven and Jake? What?
Sounds like the start of a porno.
Unfortunately, no. So, what we're actually going to be doing is having a discussion about a character who is primarily known, actually, as being one of the few major characters that we really have in the major lore, who is diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. Now,
really? I mean, you kind of think there'd be a lot more of those.
Turns out. But he's the only one who's got the proper paperwork for it, as far as I understand. Now, because we're going to be discussing a number of things that are very specific to this, we're going to give a short sort of term list so that we can all understand and discuss things according to what the current understanding of the situation is. I will also make sure that we have like some of the relevant websites that give more information about this in the show description so you can learn more about it at your leisure. Neither of us live with DID, and people who have DID have been stigmatized, and it's important and honestly base level respectful to get the terminology right, okay? DID in general is most often linked to early and repeated trauma. So typically something that is physical, it's emotional, it may be sexual abuse, it could be like disrupted attachment to childhood, it could be neglect. Not everyone who experiences trauma develops dissociative identity disorder, but, you know, most people with dissociative identity disorder or DID have reported this kind of background. Few terms that we're going to be using, alter or alter identity. So this is like a distinct like identity, personality. It's a singular part of the system within one body. Mark or Steven or Jake are individual alters. A system is the collection of alters within one body. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, it can be as few as 2 and as many as like 100, with an average being around 10. So the system of Mark and Jake and Steven as one character, that's a system. So fronting is the alter who is currently sort of in control of the body and perception. Switching, there is a process when the control switches from one alter to another. So if Jake is fronting and then there is a shift and Steven is then fronting, that is switching. Co-consciousness is when alters are aware of each other and can talk to each other internally. There's different ways that it all shakes out, but ultimately that's where it goes. And dissociative amnesia is where you have like memory gaps or lost time between like when alters are moving around between things. Like one identity doesn't necessarily recall what another has done. Now, I want to note that this isn't an exhaustive list of all the terms that are associated with DID, but we really want to make sure that we talk about, like, as we're talking about somebody with this condition, we want to do it correctly. Ooh, them short shorts! Now, let's start with who our main character is. At least the main alter who has to fill out the tax forms.
Are we sure
Marc
he's the only
Spector.
one who's filling out tax forms? I mean, the other ones do have careers of their own sometimes.
I mean, if Jake and Steven have, like, social security numbers, maybe. Who knows? There's a lot of under-the-table employees out there. So, our code name, though, is Moonlight. Our legal name, the main legal name that we worry about, is Marc Spector. He was created by Doug Minch and Don Perlin. God, I hope I said that right. Debuted in Werewolf by Night, number 32, in August 1975. So we're first introduced to like sort of a mercenary / CIA operative who was betrayed and suffered a severe ass whooping while he was in Egypt. Through divine providence or malice, you decide. He ended up basically at a temple for the Egyptian god Khonshu and agreed to be Khonshu's avatar in exchange for not dying. He fights crime as Moon Knight, wearing a striking bright white costume designed to make sure that his enemies know that he is coming, okay? Like, Batman is like, oh, let me wear, like, the grays and the darks and blah, blah, blah. Let me blend into the night, you know? Like, he's just wants to sit there and yell about how he is the night, and Moonlight's like, no, I am the night. Bing! Anyway, he was initially written as sort of an XP of Batman, and so his writers actually had to put in some work to make sure that our guys stay distinct.
And it was a lot of retroactive work, because, I mean, you look at those early comics, and the subtlety was not subtle.
No. It was not. Now, I will say that he did start out using, you know, disguises to fight crime, and over time it turns out that disguises weren't actually as separate from him as we thought. So, you know, as Stephen Grant, he's got access to funds and the life of the wealthy. You know, he's a producer. You'll see what I don't know why I got on
nice work there,
for some
Audrey.
reason there. No, that That was embarrassing. Audrey would go back and not speak to anybody for 2.5 years if she gave a performance like that. Stephen Grant, he's the producer, Marc Spector. Now, he was out there living his most mercenary life and has probably been paid pretty handsomely for some of the shenanigans that he has gotten into. And there's and Jake Lockley, he's like the street level guy, akin to Bruce's Matches Malone. Cab, he's got like the little hat situation going on, right? Now, all three of these facets had been initially used to present the hero as someone who's able to like kind of slide between worlds in different ways, right? Like the wealthy are going to know different crime details than kind of like the rank and file thugs, and being able to get the information that you need from both of them.
Not to mention the fact that if you're a paid mercenary and assassin, you can get information that way too.
I mean, there are nice ways of getting information. There are less nice ways of getting information. What matters is that you get the information. Knowledge is power, right?
G.I. Joe. Sure.
Right? So, no. It's kind of worth discussing though how like the DID aspect really like kind of moved from just like the premise of someone like having like a cover persona, like a really solid cover persona, to like a mental health issue. Now, in the show, the way that they explained it, if you call his younger brother, what was it, Randall, I believe, in the show, had died in a flash flood, and that guilt plus his mother's severe abuse, which honestly, I know that they did not, like, it was a Disney Plus show or whatever, and they could have shown probably more of like the kind of abuse that leads to DID, and I am very glad that they did not, because it is
if this had been a Netflix
severe. Like whatever his mom.
If this had been a Netflix show like the original Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, they would have gone harder.
They would have needed to have like multiple child therapists on set for like the way that she probably would have been, even if the baby wasn't even on set, for the way that she was doing a bunch of cussing and carrying on. It's very important that we understand that like within the context of the show, that's the information that we are given, that he's got the guilt of losing his brother and the abuse that comes at the hand of his mom. And that's where the DID comes from, right? It's, Stephen Grant is there to help young Marc Spector deal with the abuse. Like, it starts as though it's weird though, because like in the comics, it's like how are we like moving through the world? Like these are the different like ways and personas that you have to have.
Yeah, I mean,
and now it's
like we said at the start, with the original creation of Moonlight, it was not supposed to be this deep, complex thing. It was a very simple premise that he was just using these personas to get around, and they kept it very. It was simple. It was a simple premise. But like with everything in Marvel, simplicity is not their bag. Everything always has to go into a darker backstory. We've seen this with the Incredible Hulk, where originally was just like he was exposed to gamma radiations and he gets angry and then we find out that like Mark in the TV show, he was a child of abuse, and that caused rage issues and dissociative disorder in his own way. That didn't really get fully unlocked until the Hulk, but Mark is in a similar boat as that, and also similar to other characters like, to a different extent, but like Jean Grey, for example, another character who was a child of trauma and stuff like that. And even though the Phoenix Force is considered a outside entity many times, more recent stories have shown that it is Jean still. So it starts creating a question of whether or not Jean has that kind of DID sort of situation as well. And that's something that
Marvel's going to need to get some psychiatrists on staff because clearly there's a lot of issues that are happening that people need to like really be kind of
it's part of the bag of Marvel in general. I've always said that DC are the characters that you aspire to be. They're the gods. They're the, Wonder Woman, the Superman, the Batman, the ones you look up to and want to be like.
The gods
exactly. But then
cosplaying as
over
men,
at
yes.
Marvel, yes, we have gods running around and we have these characters who are inspiring like Storm and Captain America. But that being said,
we have the men
and
cosplaying
those are the ones
as
who are
gods.
more flawed. Those are the ones who have severe mental health issues and trauma and things that have shaped their lives in ways that are different, which was something that they really started to lean into with Marc Spector and the the Moon Knight persona and stuff like that, because they started to play with the idea, what if this isn't just a simple situation of him having identities for his cases? What if this was literally a mental health crisis that he was experiencing?
Yeah. It's something that, to a certain extent, trying to nail that down is especially something that off the rip you could know, like you'll recall from our ages episode, the 70s was not really a good time for mental health issues, but that was when the CCA started to crack open a little bit.
And also around that time, comic books started to actually delve into that kind of thing too, because we've talked about the comic authority.
That
There was a lot of things forbidding that kind of storytelling, especially when it came to heroes. They did not want the heroes being flawed in any way. They couldn't have mental health crisis. They could not be morally questionable. They had to be stalwart and true and perfect and all that. And that's the thing. When with Marc Spector and the Moonlight persona, he was one of those characters where he was not, a tried and true good hero like Captain America. He made questionable choices, and then we found out that he was also suffering from mental health issues, which...
Yeah, I should clarify, like, I would like to make sure that we are on the same page, because you remember the point where I said that, like, Stephen Grant is, like, very rich, and you're just like, wait a minute, how is Stephen Grant rich? If he is an alter, he's like a wealthy, producer guy, but again, is an alter, where did the money come from? Marc Spector has done some very, very naughty things and has been paid very well for it.
That's a thing that's always kind of interesting with these, kinds of characters, where you always question where they get the money from. I actually heard somebody talking about, like, it was a joke, but they were like, where are vampires, for example? Why are they always living in rich castles and all that stuff? And, the joke was like, oh, well, if you're not wealthy after 10,000 years, why are you even a vampire? What are you doing with your life? But the thing is, the truth of the question is, they're not earning the money legitimately most of the time. They are doing immoral, illegal shit.
Anyway,
like Marc,
that's not what matters.
Marc is honestly, mercenary. This persona is the mercenary. And the thing with that is if you're going to be a mercenary, you're going to get paid well for it. This is not something that you're, like, doing for exposure. You're doing it for the big bucks.
Yeah, although I will say that there's actually, within, like, the comics canon, there was, like, a little bit of back and forth about how much money the system actually had. Like, he could have had money from, like, being a mercenary. He could have had money from, like, some investments. He could have had money because of Khonshu. He could have also been making all of the money things up and actually been deeply in the red. Is he broke?
Well, it always depends on the story being told at the time, but the funny thing is that all of these things can kind of feed into each other, because, Khonshu could be giving him the luck and stuff to get money, but it might be because he's helping with Marc's motivations as being a mercenary, and then Marc's taking that money and giving it to Steven to invest into investments and all that stuff. It could be an, like, interfeeded cycle that all of his career goals, even like the cab thing, is like his McDonald's money.
I mean, sometimes you gotta have some walking around money, I guess. Sure. But so I will say, like, going back to the show, because again, there's a lot of stuff that, like, I think that the casual, like, nerd is going to, like, know a bit about, like, from the show, and we're delving, from there, that as your base level. But so in the show, Stephen Grant is a fictive alter. Essentially, this is, like, kind of a terminology situation, but Marc has a favorite TV character who becomes an alter that he uses as a means to protect his psyche. So that's why, like, that's why Stephen has the British accent, despite the fact that he is, presumably a young American Jewish boy, right? So, like, he's not really, in the comics, he's not actually a fictive. He's not, he's not based on, like, an archaeologist. He is a full, like, separate mask situation. So how does that get mixed up? Is that just, like, we need to figure out how we're going to put this guy in England, or...
Well,
like,
I kind of imagine that, especially for Marvel, they wanted to play up a bit more into the archaeology stuff and whatnot. Thanks to colonialism and taking a lot of stuff that doesn't belong to them, England is quite famous for having really great museums. So that...
Oh my goodness. If the British Museum was looted by all of the countries that Britain stole stuff from, that would be amazing. That's not nice.
We are
That's
not supporting
nice
the looting of
institutions,
but we are not...
Nobody is supporting, like, the breaking and entering of the British Museum. However, people of the British Museum are willing to give the items back to the places that they came from, and, assume that maybe other grown people are able to protect their own heritage, like grown folks, then, we could assume that, but that's neither here nor there. What matters is, though, there is a point within like the storyline that Marc has gotten involved with a few different like team ups and such. And one of the team ups that is actually interesting is the team up that he did with Captain America and Wolverine and Spider-Man. And if you're looking at the video feed, you will see me looking very confused and perplexed because it turns out that those were actually also alters of those three that he had for a time. So like in the comics, Stephen Grant wasn't a fictive and he was actually like a mask. And then over time, various aspects of him have shifted. And now like Stephen and Jake and Khonshu are the main alters. But, you know, he did maybe work with Cats and Wolverine and Spider-Man.
It's the fun with shifting storytelling and stuff like that. Especially a big problem that happens with Moonlight is you're always wondering if this is a unreliable narrator sort of thing. Because, yes, we're the outsiders looking in on the storytelling, but there's also just that kind of issue of, like, we're also still seeing this through Moon Knight's story. And that kind of leads into the questions of, like, well, did this happen the way we think it happened? Or are we getting, like, a third-party thing, and then when we see it through the eyes of another character, it's completely different. And, yeah, it's like... But
I do want to shout out the episode of Buffy. I want to say it's like season 6, Normal Again, where basically we, as the viewers, are given an experience where essentially we're seeing that Buffy is in a mental institution. And when I say that she's in like a mental institution, like her, like everything is like complete, like the entirety of Sunnydale is made up to the point where like her parents are still together, right? Like, and she's given a choice to a certain extent. Does she want to stay in Sunnydale or does she want to get better? And now, as we all know, Buffy does decide to leave her most Sunnydale life. And, you know, as messed up as Sunnydale is, she chooses that life.
I always kind of hated that episode.
And there is a point when, like, but there's a point when, like, we basically see, though, that Marc is being held as a mental patient and everybody else is kind of out there, like, you know, sort of living their lives. And the question is
what's
just,
the real
like,
reality?
Which one is real? Is he just, like, some crazy guy, like, in an institution? Or is he, you know, actually someone who's, like, doing the thing and being held prisoner? And like they did use like the storyline in the show, and I know that I keep referencing the show, but again, I think it's like a pretty solid casual jumping off point. Like they did reference that storyline in the show where it's basically like they had to decide were they actually like to a certain extent crazy or not, which we're not gonna go down that route, but to a certain extent, did he need to be institutionalized? Was he at a level that he needed to be institutionalized? He determined that was not the case. And he also went off to live his most Moonlight life.
Well, I mean, that was the thing that's also kind of interesting with the show because, you know, there's the fact that, you know, you question, does he need, you know, intense psychiatric care?
Something that one would probably expect because somebody with dissociative identity disorder.
Like, he is also somebody who is living in the Marvel universe where the gods exist. Literal gods exist. And, you know, we know that Khonshu is playing Puppet Master during all of this. So a lot of this also becomes a question of, like, how much of this is his trauma? How much of it is the machinations of Khonshu and the other gods who are using Moon Knight and other people in the story as puppets? So there's always an underlining question of how much autonomy does Marc/Steven/Jake have? How much of it is his actual mental health issues, and how much of it is being exasperated by Khonshu's, you know, behavior and actions.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting is how the different levels of Khonshu-ness to a certain extent, like how much of him is Khonshu, is somewhat reflected in his costume. So you have the very cool, like, sort of Arabian Nights costume that he originally has, and that's kind of seems to be something where he's got a sort of mix of things. Then you've got his very cool Mr. Knight costume, and that also seems to have a solid mix of things. But in each of these situations, he is covered head to toe in like the costume, and there's actually like a sort of kind of thing where he has like an almost skull mask situation where he is just fully just like Khonshu's fist kind of vibes, where he's just like he is completely surrendered to whatever it is that like Khonshu is doing to take over. So it's interesting to see both like how like whoever is fronting him impacts
The hero
however
persona
he
presents. Yeah.
goes into like his and there's a certain amount of it too is just like how much of whatever like the persona the presentation is like him versus how much of it is like Khonshu like just kind of taking him over, really
well,
puppet
that's the thing. It's like
mastering him.
I feel
And
like Khonshu is controlling and manipulating to certain extents, depending on the storyline too. Because
Mhm.
I mean, there's a recent storyline involving the Avengers, and Khonshu and Moonlight went full. We're gonna do whatever the fuck we want, and we'll beat anybody who gets in our way kind of mindset. And
I mean, if you have like a god and like a fist of the god, there's a certain arrogance that they're kind
yeah,
of bound to end
but
up with.
in this case with his presentations, I always kind of feel like it's certain levels of partnership in most cases where Khonshu has largely realized that he can't fully control Mark at all times, or Steven, or whichever persona we're dealing with. So he gives them his power, which involves the creation of the costume. It's all encompassing and all that because, Khonshu does want Moon Knight to be more of a weapon than a person in some ways. So I feel like the removal of any human
Yeah.
features and having like the skull-like mask or the hood and all that stuff,
Mhm.
if we're delving into the more modern storytelling, I feel like that is his way of saying, this is my weapon. He is not a person, he is a weapon. But again, he can't fully control Mark or Steven or Jake because of the fact that they have that split personality. So it's not like having one
Yeah.
person you're controlling. You're also trying to control two other personalities who are able to interchange and take control at any point. So I think that's the reason why this costume alters, because of the fact that
Khonshu is trying to manage a system as opposed
exactly
to a singular person.
they
So So I think it's really interesting to note that, like, if you think of like who is fronting at any given point, you're going to have Steven or Mark who's going to be impacting either the sort of Arabian Nights or the Mr. Knight version of Moon Knight. But Jake Lockley, he doesn't really seem to have a full head to toe kind of like Khonshu cover guy. Is that like, is there a reason
well,
for
it's
that?
probably because of the fact that he's the street level character and stuff like that. He's the persona that is more, honestly, he feels like more of a prop than he does a full blown persona sometimes. I mean, he gets pulled out
That's fair.
for the street level stuff, I've heard this on the street kind of guy. And so it's possible that just he's not utilized enough to really warrant the full covering of, Khonshu and stuff like that.
Not utilized enough. He got 3.5 seconds of screen
Well,
time in the show. It was an Easter egg for people who watch past
well,
like
I also
the
think it
end
was supposed
credits,
to set up
wasn't
a
it?
second season if they had given him a second season.
Oscar, please. I know
I
you're
don't think
busy,
it's a question of
but
Oscar.
please.
I think at this point it's a question of Marvel really trying to recenter themselves because they were stretching themselves way too thin with too many projects.
Kevin,
I mean,
get it
let's be
together.
honest.
Kevin, this is not the first time I've told you this, Kevin.
If I
Get
were a
it
betting
together.
man, we will probably never see Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night, Moon Knight, maybe even She-Hulk in future projects, because I really feel like
Yeah.
they're just kind of ignoring a lot of that right now, including the Eternals, which wasn't even a TV show, it's a movie.
Fair. All right. So instead of thinking about Marvel, the cinematic universe, let's go to marvel.com. More specifically on the website, as I was looking up, a lot of information about Moon Knight because he is adjacent to my special interest that I will mention at the end of this. It kept mentioning his serial killer brother, Randall, aka Shadow Knight. And now I know that Wolverine and Sabretooth were antagonists, but like, why is it on site with his brother? Like, is the brother actually is like the betrayer of record that led to him getting snapped up by Khonshu? So I have no idea what's going on. Like, because again, in the show, he passed as a child, and now as an adult, he's a serial killer, and Mark has to fight him multiple times.
I mean, it's a Cain and Abel story, They're going for that entire premise of the two brothers who will constantly fight and probably kill each other sort of thing. It's cinematic, I suppose, but Yeah,
So
they
Mark is the able in this story?
little
Or the
column A, little
Cain?
column B.
Okay.
I
All
mean, we
right.
see it all the time in these kinds of
So
stories. Like you said, in the movies it was Wolverine and Sabretooth, but they in the comics are not related at all. You have low-key brother rivalries like Havoc and Cyclops, and then you've got like
I thought you were saying Loki, like, Loki and
I,
Thor, who's also a famous brotherly rivalry. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It sounded like you were, you know
that's what I was
what?
saying. It's
This
like
is the
you've got the
reason why.
low-level brother rivalries, but like Cyclops and Havoc, and then you've got the massive brother rivalries like Loki and Thor, where Loki spends years trying to kill Thor. He's better at it than he was before now, but still.
I just want to point out the fact that there was a whole story in the MCU where Thor is just like, oh, he turned himself into a snake, and because he knew I admired snakes, and I picked it up, and I'm like, oh, what a cool snake, and then he bit me, and I'm just like, Thor, this is not really a good rivalry. That's
Yeah,
you just
but that's
being
kids.
dumb.
But it's like with Moon Knight and Shadow
I
Knight,
suppose.
they are essentially trying to do what they keep trying to do with Batman. Give him a mirror version of himself. In the comics, sometimes it's, Batman and Joker, or Batman and Bane, or Batman and Owlman, or Batman and, no,
Man-Bat?
Batman and, like, Thomas Wayne Batman. No, Man-Bat is not, so.
I figured that maybe, like, it sounds like the attempt was made with
Oh, no,
Man-Bat,
Man-Bat
but I
was just
wasn't
kind of
sure.
like, scientists who've done fucked up and, went Cronenberg on himself. But we get...
Oh, so this is akin to, like, Man-Spider.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And the thing is, like, you've also got, like, Spider-Man and Venom, those kinds of things. Captain America versus Stevel, the evil Captain Hydra America guy. But...
I mean, wasn't that one like a sentient cube situation though?
But
Like,
it's still the
there's a
same thing.
lot
It's the
going on
mirror
there.
version of the hero. And, going with the idea
Fair.
of Moon Knight, who is himself suffering from mental health issues, having a brother who is a psychopath, sociopath, serial killer, it does create an maybe not altogether good approach to mental health dynamics, but it also creates some drama in that sense.
Yes. So I will say, like, and again, so continuing on the drama aspect, but in the show, it is his sort of ex current ish
Mhm.
wife, Layla, who like ultimately actually ends up as an avatar to another one of the gods. But in the comics, the love interest of Record is actually named Marlene Alaroon. Like, she's actually like the one who, like, her dad's the one who like is like the archaeologist team where, Mark gets betrayed from, and Marlene is like the one that he keeps coming back to. Like, what are they doing with like these two different people? Because it seems like they're not like actually like mixing them so much as just
Well, it's one of those things, I believe, where they are kind of just mixing and matching things a bit, because, Layla is, I believe, an existing character in the comics. So, yeah.
Right. That's why I was confused.
So, again, I'm not an expert on Moon Knight mythology or on, his supporting characters, but yeah, it's like Layla, I'm trying to remember how it went exactly, but she did get romantically involved with Mark in college, I think. So I think they had like a
Okay.
relationship, and I think they kind of like hinted at that in Moon Knight. They had a past relationship and all that stuff, right? Yeah.
Okay, so that's where like
Yeah,
the X part comes in. Got it.
I think she might have been killed, and that might have also been another
that-
factor in when, Mark started going down to becoming an avatar for Khonshu and Moon Knight and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if, again, I was not an active reader, but if I'm remembering some of the stuff that she did die and was offered the chance to become a avatar for another god, like they did in the show. And
Right.
I think she's the Scarlet Scarab or something like that.
Yeah. Like, cause her divine protector person was like the
Yeah.
hippo lady, right?
And I think they were doing that same thing in the comics too. Again, I'm not 100% sure because very limited knowledge on this, but
Yeah.
I think you wanted to love because
Yeah.
she was also a lot more interesting to look at and stuff like that, because she does get the power. She does become like almost an equal to Mark in that sense. So,
Her hair is
and
fantastic.
I mean, if we're going to go back to, Moon Knight being kind of a ripoff of Batman, she essentially becomes a Batgirl.
Not really like a Catwoman.
A little bit
of vibe?
Catwoman, a little bit Batgirl, because it's like, she feels almost like a spin-off character to Mark in a sense. Catwoman on
Okay.
the I might, arguably make a more direct comparison to Mark in some ways, is the X-Men character Legion. For those unfamiliar, Legion is
Okay.
the son of Professor Charles Xavier and a Israeli dignitary, Gabrielle Haler. And David Haler,
Okay.
aka Legion, he suffers from his own version of dissociative disorder, but his is on a whole other level because of the fact that he is an Omega class mutant and he has several thousand different personalities,
This is the one who,
have
like,
a
each
different
of his
power.
alters, like, has, like, a
Exactly.
different power, right?
And so and
That's
an
rough.
aspect of having the different personalities and different powers is he's not able to access all of them normally. There are some stories where he's able to like get those personalities to basically work with him and he becomes next level godlike. But
Okay, so Doom Patrol Crazy Jane, is that a similar situation where, like, she has all these
yeah, very
different
much so.
extra powers and
Yeah,
such, but she
these are
can't
all
access
characters
them
who they
because
play on the idea of dissociative disorder while also having certain powers and skill sets that are not shared among all the personas. And
I dislike this premise to a certain extent because of the fact that, like, dissociative identity disorder comes from trauma, and you're not generally going to get a new power because you have trauma.
agreed. Again,
But also, Marvel writers are not psychiatrists, so they're not really
yeah,
trained
no,
in
a
this
lot
kind
of
of
times,
thing.
especially some of these older characters that have been around, for several decades, the writers just kind of took these approaches because they thought it'd be an interesting story without really contemplating how it presents mental health and stuff like that. A lot more
Yeah.
writers nowadays who better understand mental health stuff do try to handle these things in better ways when they can, but sometimes it's they
Okay.
can't always pull it off without basically reducing the effectiveness of the character. Two-Face, for example. He's got
Yeah.
dissociative disorder as well, and while they do sometimes get him to mentally heal and all that stuff, they still keep going back to that well of him just being evil because one part of his body is damaged.
Well, I will say that from the research that I saw on DID, I will say that, like, it is generally childhood trauma. However, it is something that, like, a singular traumatic event can happen, like, as an adult, that could cause dissociative identity disorder. So, you know, Two-Face getting, like, acid attacked to the face and having, like, an entirely different situation happen as a result of that trauma, from my understanding,
Well, they
psychologically
also have
makes sense. But I'm just gonna say that, like, in 1945, they probably didn't really have a really strong premise of, like, adults having, like, a
well,
singular traumatic
that's the
event
thing.
causing DID.
Back then that was kind of his entire story because he was created with the whole idea of being this really good lawyer. He gets the traumatic like scarring and all that stuff and flips a coin, decides to become evil because the coin told him to do that. But other stories,
Right.
other
And
interpretations of
so
the story,
that kind of, like, they're not going to necessarily, like, they're not necessarily going to say, like, at that point, especially, like, in that time frame, that this
oh
is
no, because
dissociative
they didn't
identity
even
disorder. This is caused
they
by
didn't even have that
trauma.
terminology at the time.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they didn't have the
Exactly.
words for
But
it
then
that for
more
a bunch of
modern
this.
versions of the
So
stories and stuff like that, they have delved into that. So Batman the Animated Series, for example, when they were going for the Two-Face story, first off, they started with introducing Two-Face's alter ego, Harvey Dent, early on in the series. We did not meet him immediately going into the Two-Face storyline. We saw him as an associate of Bruce Wayne and a friend and stuff like that. And over the course of the series, especially leading up to the Two-Face reveal, they went for the childhood trauma plot point where
I mean, the childhood trauma is going to probably
well
create some of the cracks
that's the
that will
thing
lead
because in the
to,
story they talk about how
yeah.
when he was a child he was mercilessly bullied and one day his anger and rage built up so much that he attacked the bully back and initially he thought good for me, then he found out that the bully ended up in the hospital and the trauma of him letting out his rage and anger made him basically create a alternate that he tried to suppress, which was what they called at the time Big Bad Harv. But,
Yeah.
the ironic thing is the bully was not actually in the hospital because of Harvey. He had appendicitis. But Harvey did not recognize that. And it created a trauma in him. It created the building blocks to becoming Two-Face. We had the bad Harv always there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until it always kept flaring out whenever you got really angry, but it wasn't until the damage happened that he went full-blown supervillain. And that's something that
Yeah.
happens with a lot of characters when they are given the D DID. Yeah.
Dissociative Identity Disorder. Yeah. And I am really looking forward to a more responsible era of comic book writers because of the fact that, to a certain extent, there's a lot like I know that Harley could probably have her office just absolutely filled with all of the villains that, she is okay, she's probably technically qualified to diagnose anymore because again, she
Oh yeah,
probably
she lost
doesn't
her
have her
license.
license. But at one point she was qualified to diagnose and prescribe to a bunch of people because she'd done the full gamut. She was a psychiatrist, gone to medical school. And there's a lot of characters that honestly, if you spent time really thinking about what the stuff that they've gone through and stuff that they've dealt with, definitely have different traumas. I will say that one of the things that I really enjoyed with the TV show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is that they actually sat there and sent the main characters bio and a lot of different character sketches and stuff, and just heck, what is it what is the diagnosis that you would give to this character with these different things. And because they wouldn't actually have psychiatrists and such look at it, they're able to be hey, somebody who has these kind of activities, these kind of impulsive behaviors, these kind of blah blah blahs that they go after, they're going to probably be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And so that they actually work that into the storyline of the show of just this is a person who she has borderline, she has to go to therapy and take her meds and stuff like that. And I think that it's a real prospect of, including this kind of forward-looking awareness of mental health issues in
Yep.
comics going forward, just by virtue of the fact of, if nothing else, just we are aware of stuff now and it's not quite as stigmatized to
Yeah.
talk about.
I mean,
so yeah.
One thing that's I'm not sure if they've done an episode on Moon Knight yet, but there is a series called the Arkham Sessions. I think I've brought him up before. It's another podcast I highly recommend where a clinical psychologist and her husband go over the Batman the Animated Series as well as other superhero storytelling and discuss the real mental health, psychology, treatment methods, and stuff like that. And they do several episodes discussing a dissociative identity disorder. They do several regarding Two-Face, for example. And I'm not sure if if they've done one for Moon Knight, but I do feel like that would be a podcast for a lot of people to listen to if they are interested in the idea of characters who have these kinds of mental health issues and how they could be treated, helped, and presented in media and stuff like that. And the interesting thing is the psychologist, Dr. Andrea Ledmende, she was actually recruited by Gail Simone, who was writing Batgirl at the time for the New 52. And part of Batgirl's storytelling during that time was her recovering from back injury and receiving mental health for post-traumatic stress disorder, survivor's guilt, and other mental health issues. Andrea worked with Gail Simone to discuss the mental health stuff and the kind of treatment that characters like Barbara would receive as a veteran of a war, essentially. So, it's one of those that there are writers who do seek out mental health specialists to discuss these kinds of issues. So we are luckily getting a lot of good steps in that by writers who are taking this very seriously. Then there are other writers who I feel like they still kind of rely on pseudoscience that they use for older storytelling. There is a storyline from DC called Heroes in Crisis, which was intended to be a book about the mental health of superheroes in the DC universe. Unfortunately, so the writer who wrote that book, Tom King, he's done some amazing work. If you ever get a chance, read his Mr. Miracle series. Highly recommend that. He did not do well with Heroes in Crisis. Part of it was a lot of writing that was happening at the time. I'm not sure if it was from editorial or his own stuff, but he was somebody who understood the idea of trauma because, interestingly enough, he was part of, I believe, the CIA. So he's no stranger to, that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure if he consulted actual therapists on how these kinds of issues can happen with people and how treatment goes. And, well, let's just say his ideas towards how the heroes would seek therapy were very questionable because essentially it was, and I'm going completely off topic, but from Moonlight.
No,
But
please continue.
essentially, he decided that heroes would get treatment from an artificial intelligence created by Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman.
That sounds like a terrible
the reason why
idea.
it sounded so stupid. It was like the intellect of Batman, the courage of Superman, and the compassion of Wonder Woman. That would create a great therapist, but it wasn't a therapist. It wasn't.
Two of those characters are known for punching
All three of them
things
are.
real hard. I mean, I was trying to
Yeah.
be nice, but yes, they're
And
really known
yes,
for like punching more
Of
than like
all
therapizing.
of all of them, Wonder Woman would probably be the closest thing to a good therapist because she's very much in.
Yeah, but she'd also be able to just like
Well, that's
lasso you
but
and
that's
make
part
you
of the
like
thing.
talk
It's like
it out
with
for
her,
real.
because she is the spirit of truth, so she would get people to talk truthfully with or without the lasso.
Yeah.
But in Heroes in Crisis, they understood that people have trauma, but they don't. It didn't feel like they really
Mhm.
understood why the trauma affected them and how it could manifest properly. How people manifest the trauma. So it was like a lot of it was just characters sitting in a room and saying like a couple of lines of something that affects them. So,
Right.
Superman, talking about like feeling like an outsider, or Barbara Gordon showing, lifting up her costume and showing the bullet wound that went through her back and spine. The Robins having like, feelings of inadequacy because they don't know where they fit in the family.
This
and
feels
it's like
really
he was
involved,
doing all
yeah.
these different things, trying to show all these heroes having trauma and stuff like that. But the main narrative of the story is that Wally West, the Flash, is experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. He is lost his family. His wife doesn't remember him because of continuity reboots. His children don't exist in this timeline. And he is suffering severe mental health issues. And he's being left alone with an artificial intelligence trying to heal his trauma. And it causes him to, his power shouldn't work this way, but kill a bunch of people by accident. And this is the kind of...
See, like we are already going to be talking about
Yeah.
Wally West in the future, but
my entire point is how we have some writers like Gail Simone who worked so tirelessly to make sure she created a narrative for Barbara recovering from trauma and discussing the actual stuff that can affect people. And again, her podcast goes over people with these different mental health disorders. And then you have
Right.
Heroes in Crisis, where it just kind of feels like they're relying on a lot of simplified ideas about what mental health trauma and stuff like that is, without actually like taking the time to show how it can get better. Instead, it just made mental health trauma feel like it's just a bad thing and there's no, it's going to lead to death and destruction. And that's a fear with Moonlight.
So I will
because,
say that
his character is one of those where he has this dissociative disorder, but he is also being constantly used as a weapon, utilizing his trauma and utilizing his mental health issues. So it does beg the question of like, how respectful is this kind of storytelling to people who are actually experiencing this?
how do we sit there and make sure that someone who has a stigmatized disorder that they did not
Exactly.
ask for, that comes as a
And that's
result of trauma, how are we
And that's the reason why I'm
treating them
saying it's like
respectfully?
it's important that writers, if they're going to talk about characters with this kind of stuff, with kind of mental health issues, just talk to the professionals about it. Try to get, good insight into this to help craft your stories.
That was
Sorry.
a bit of a downer. Mental health needs to be treated way better in this world, all of the worlds. But we do have to wrap things up for this section. So I will make my special interest pivot. I watched Sailor Moon in the 90s. I know, huge shock and surprise. This is like the 15th time that I've mentioned it. And they had in Sailor Moon R, they had the Moonlight Night after Mamoru lost his memory after the fight with the Dark Kingdom. And it was really interesting because, he had the whole Arabic costuming, like the bright white, and he threw like with the crescent moons, and he's throwing a lot of white roses and stuff. And it's just really interesting how there's like the same, like this whole compunction to protect and dress in all white to, take care of the people that you love. All right. Maybe I'm the only one who thought that was a fun connection, but, as far as I know, there was actually like some crossover from in the 90s about like, or anime. Like,
it's like
Moonlit Night.
there's
So
there's
we're gonna
fan
take a
art
quick
out there
break.
of Sailor Moon Knight. Look it up.
See, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with our thrilling conclusion because I have very important Sailor Moon Knight information to look up. You can't just drop this intro on me right now. Listeners, we'll be right back. Okay. Oh, welcome back for our thrilling conclusion. So, as wild as it is to think about how like nice and buttoned up like the MCU series, there's a lot that was happening with Marc Spector that could really never happen in some of the earlier parts of Marvel's history. And also, speaking of earlier parts of history, I did make the comment about how Moonlight was like the character who was known for his DID. And while I contend that he is the one who's like known for it, as you could tell from our earlier discussion, there's probably a lot more characters who could, should, very likely, like if a therapist actually like spent some time with them, get that diagnosis as well. But, honestly, back in the day, they would barely allow people to have like the more standard mental health issues. So there is no way that they would have allowed somebody to have DID
Unless
in
they
the
were a
past.
villain.
I mean, unless they were a villain, but like, how did they make a knockoff Bruce Wayne and then turn him into somebody to bring attention to an under-recognized and stigmatized mental issue? That's crazy. That's not a good word to use in this
Funny thing
context,
is,
is it?
Batman has actually stolen a bit of Moon Knight's shtick in recent years. Yeah,
And the
in
cycle
recent stories,
continues.
Batman has been revealed to have a second persona that he created in the event that the Batman Bruce Wayne personas became compromised. And yeah, it's like the Batman Azaraham or something like that.
Do you think that nobody's going to
Well, that's
recognize
the
his
thing.
face? Like, there's a lot of billionaires who can like
it's
slide under the radar, but Bruce Wayne is a
well,
very
this Batman persona. So you got like, depending on who's telling the story, Batman is the real persona. Bruce Wayne is just a mask. The Batman of Arzaham, I
Yeah.
cannot remember how it's pronounced. But this version in recent stories is basically a Batman that Bruce created for himself, and it's almost like a psychotic, separated version of him. More violent, more manipulative, more. And it's based on several stories. There's different variations of this, but the most recent one felt very Moon Knight in some ways.
Well, on that note, here's some fun comic themed activities for your calendar this week. Now, I will clarify that this one is technically from the previous time, but I wanted to make sure that we have AM for this one on, okay? On 10/8/1985, we have Uncanny X-Men number 201 by Chris Claremont and Rick Leonardi. And that is the first appearance of baby Nathan Christopher Summers. Coochie-coo! The child of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, a.k.a. the baby who would grow up to be Cable. And there's like a battle for leadership of the X-Men between a depowered Mohawk Storm and Cyclops. But really the important part is that
Nathan, who would go through his own amount of trauma. Just so much trauma.
Speaking of 10/8, if you're hitting the comic shops this weekend, just know that Supergirl number 6 has Night Flame coming to ruin some trips to the pumpkin patch that was just released on the 8th. A Spoopy Queen herself, 1469. Lee and Jack Kirby introduced Agatha Harkness and her cat Ebony in Fantastic Four.
She was introduced as Franklin Richards' nanny, of all things.
These super
I just
babies
love the
are
fact
a problem.
that she was introduced as a nanny to Franklin in the comics. And meanwhile, in the TV show, her being around kids is very dangerous.
It's not the kids, it's the dog that's the problem.
The kids, too.
Fair. 10/16/1979, Uncanny X-Men number 129 was released. An incredibly pivotal issue in Marvel Comics history. Again, this is Chris Claremont and John Byrne. They brought us the first official part of the Dark Phoenix saga. We are also first introduced to Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde. And we get suggestions of future antagonists in the form of the Hellfire Club and Sebastian Shaw and Donald Pierce in the Massachusetts Academy.
Yeah, it's amazing how that storyline affected the X-Men for so many years to come, and the twists and changes. I mean, Emma Frost was introduced as your like standard femme fatale evil woman, and ended up becoming a leader of the X-Men. Kitty Pryde, annoying kid character that suddenly became one of the most iconic heroes in the X-Men.
And like Marc Spector, a member of the tribe.
Oh, yeah. We didn't particularly we didn't touch much on Mark's Jewish heritage in this one. I'm kind of surprised by that.
Well, that's because Oscar Isaac is amazing, but he is not Jewish. And so, like every time I like try to give props for Marvel, like casting Jewish people to play Jewish characters, then I'm like, oh yeah, but here's the Jewish character that they cast with
Yeah,
someone who's not
Marvel's
Jewish.
not exactly. It's unfortunate thing that generally superhero stories try to avoid religion in the movies.
Yeah, but it's
Oh
the
no, I
ethno
get
part
that.
of
I
things
completely
too.
agree with you. But it is something that I just always notice that they always downplay the religious aspects for most characters. Like the most overtly religious character we've gotten is probably Nightcrawler in like live action.
I mean,
Maybe Daredevil
the
too.
thing
Daredevil
in
too. I forgot
Fantastic
Daredevil.
Four, was attending shul.
Oh, no.
Thank you. He was
I'm glad that they
he
showed.
was like
I'm glad
there.
that they
He
showed
was
that.
at temple.
But they didn't have it hanging over like they did with Nightcrawler and Daredevil, for example.
Catholic guilt is a very different level than Jewish guilt, friends.
Yeah,
You know
and
this
so
more than I
rarely
do.
do the heroes have their mom around to give them the good Jewish guilt. When are you getting married? Why are you saving superheroes when you should be getting married and giving me grandkids?
Their moms are with them in their hearts, okay? They're with them in their hearts. You never
but
forget
I'm
the
just saying,
sound
like,
your mom
could you
makes.
imagine like Daredevil or Moon Knight having their mom literally like shaming them for not coming to dinner and why don't you have a girlfriend yet?
Can't really picture Daredevil's mom shaming him because she died when he was little.
Wait, I didn't say
man.
Daredevil.
Come on.
Did I say Daredevil? I meant Thing and sorry.
You said Daredevil. Do you want to talk about Bruce Wayne's mom? Because she's
And could you
also a
imagine
Jewish
how
mom.
hilarious it would be
died
if
when he was
had
little?
like the stereotypical Jewish mother while he's being Batman?
Actually, yes, because of the Martha Wayne, like the storyline where Martha Wayne was like actually like secretly like taking out undercover child sex trafficking rings. That was a really solid novelization, and I need to remember the name of it. I'm so mad that I can't right now. I'm sure that somebody's yelling it at me.
Tell us in the comments.
Well, tell us in the comments. I'm sorry. I forgot. Please tell me. But listeners, we have in fact come to the end of our podcast. I know. You're clearly devastated. How is this over so soon? Well, good news. Our first collaboration is going to be with X-Men 101, and it is coming soon. It may take some patience for you to get to that point. Although I suppose if you're really, impatient, that's what the archives are for.
Yeah. Nerd cred takes time to build.
But, if you are able to turn childhood trauma into keeping other kids safe, then you're out here breaking generational curses, and we salute you for that.
And now it's time to mention that we have an Instagram. We're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and working to expand our reach. If you like the episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe, especially if you're trying to up your nerd cred.
You can follow us across Instagram or just general platforms at Up Your Nerd Cred Pod. If you're looking for me across platforms, I'm at
And
Kirsten
I'm
Davis.
AM Diaz Art. Come yell at me about continuity errors, show your fan art. Either way, I'll take whatever.
Show them the good kind.
And if you have burning questions that you want us to discuss so you can up your nerd cred, make sure you like and subscribe, leave comments, and if we pick your question, we'll shout it out at the next discussion segment.
And please make sure to get your friends to also like and subscribe to the pod, and your family and your coworkers not to be weird about listening to the same podcast as you, and the guy in the bus, and the one on the train,
And good night,
oh my
everybody.
God, he's not going to stop me.